What's up, guys? Of course, what you're going to be seeing today is some sniping highlights. I do wish I had gotten more highlights for other weapons on other classes, but the last 4 days or so of the beta I didn't really get the chance to play because I was in Toronto for Fan Expo, chasing storms. It was nice weather, we playing football all the time, so didn't get the chance for that. But that will change, of course, come base game. I'll be doing everything from weapon reviews, class reviews, all that. So stay tuned, enjoy the show. But with regard to at least the sniping highlights in the back here, I did have a commentary topic with regard to 3 pieces of news that Battlefield 1 has had recently that I felt was worth discussing today, being the 19th, the difference between the 8th and the 19th. The first was an infographic that gave you all sorts of stats in the beta, which I'll discuss. The second is PC specs and whether or not I'm actually going to be playing on PC or PS4. That'll, of course, we'll get to the discussion. And lastly, DICE also came out with an article discussing the changes that they had that they're going to implement in the base game based on not only community feedback but how it played out in the beta. So we'll discuss all these today. First, the infographic. As you can see, it had 13.2 million players total come to try it out, which through some quick research anyway is one of the largest total amounts for short-term beta in history. I think it was like double Destiny's, because Destiny was like 6.5 or something like that. So it's pretty impressive total. But of course this doesn't count something like Counter-Strike or Dota, where basically they're finished games but they're listed as a beta and they have a lot more players. We're not counting those. So in terms of at least Battlefield 1 generating a hype train, it certainly got that goal. How it will translate to sales remains to be seen, of course, because I think it'll depend on how stable the game launches, how well balanced it is, the longevity factor, and how much fun people have playing the game, how the maps play out. You know, we'll see. And of course how much they're going to charge for it. $79 in Canada certainly isn't a cheap amount, so maybe the Canadian base takes a bit of a hit. Maybe the American base loves it a lot more. Maybe they play it more. We'll see. Spitballing, of course. Breaking down the most popular classes, of course, started as Assault, or the new Engineer, at the top at 30%, 28% for Scout or Sniper, and then Scout or Support and Medic following it out. Interesting to note, though, here a DICE developer on Twitter came out and said that the infographic has an error. Support was actually the least played at 10%, and Medic was the second last, so they swapped spots. I had seen tons of different suggestions on how to improve the Medic class based on this low rating from the community, and I think it would be extremely interesting to see if a lot of those suggestions now have merit based on, well, this information coming out that it was an error. Some, of course, I'm sure logistically will, some won't, some were probably required. Like I had seen some say, well, the weapons need to be dramatically changed to be much more powerful as a result, and I don't know, the Mondragon and others I've seen were quite strong. Let's throw that suggestion out the window. So we'll see. Interesting to note, of course, too, is that Scout was very high, and I've seen tons of people complaining about all sorts of snipers, but I think sniping's always going to be a big part of the Battlefield community. I mean, you're not to be lost, the sniping highlights you see in the back, but I think that's part of the beta. A lot of people really wanted to try out a whole bunch of different weapons, even if they weren't used to trying them out, seeing what they play like, seeing what they feel like, and I'm sure that number will sort of eventually round out, especially as they make changes, which I'll get to shortly. Next, 13 million people killed by the armored train is a stat I actually find very interesting because what it could potentially mean in terms of match flow and potential balance issues. So if DICE had a correlation between the train getting a ton of kills and whether it actually turns a match around or cements it as the team or cements it as victory, I'd love to see those stats. Seeing how this new form of evolution changes match flow and I think would be pivotal analyzing the stats to seeing if it affects balance in any way. As a quick side note, I was also quite shocked to see 62 million horse kills and 28 million road kills, which I'm sure the horses played a large part of. But I'll get to that in a minute with changes that DICE has made. Next, news on a free map to be delivered in December was also delivered. It will be called Giant Shadow and will be featured in the cold autumn of 1918, so more than likely you're going to be seeing fog, snowfall, potentially heavy rains, and maybe even a colorful backdrop display as the leaves have changed and perhaps begin to fall. And I can already tell you, if there's going to be lots of leaves in the air all the time, it's going to make for scary moments of mistaken enemies sneaking up on you when you see some sort of object cross the screen in your peripheral vision. You're like, oh shit! Oh no, it wasn't an enemy, it was just a leaf. So there'll be moments like that, I'm sure. And I quote, "It'll be featured in open country, in the shadow of a giant crashed ship, with tanks and an armored train being featured on this map." So again, potential balance issues. We'll see how that plays out. The caption also hints at a railway center, meaning this will be a control point for potential control point for flag assets, and more than likely area where infantry battles will take place for a prominent feature in the map, I'm sure. I'll update more, of course, as news comes out more on this map, and of course I imagine I'll be playing it quite a bit. Next, minimum PC specs were released today as of the 19th. My first impressions were that this game would require an incredibly powerful PC just to run the thing, but I doubt that even on the minimum specs that they're going to be this intensive come the base game. Seeing an i5 6600K as the minimum requirement when I've seen people running like on an i5 3570 or an i2500, of course they aren't running it on ultra specs, of course, but seeing them run it like that and have no problems in the beta, like achieving 60 plus frames at the minimum, leads me to believe that this is either a listed error or DICE is sort of listing the specs high as part of marketing, saying you need such a powerful PC to run something that's going to look so beautiful. So perhaps this will be intensive when the game becomes optimized, and it may be very CPU intensive, but I doubt that it'll be this high. Recommended specs, of course, are expectedly quite high as well, and though my PC is a couple of years old now, it checks off most of those boxes. I have a GTX 770 and I'm thinking of upgrading it to a 1070 before the game comes out, but like I said earlier, I am discussing getting it for PS4 because all my friends are going to be on there, and I found that playing BF4 basically by yourself kind of sucked. So I might end up getting the game for both at some point, but spending $150 this early in the game's life cycle before I've gone through the trials and tribulations and possible rocky launch doesn't really make a lot of logical sense considering how anti-premium I am and how pro-consumer rights I've been since the Battlefield 4 terrible launch days. So we'll see how it plays out, which I choose at the base launch. I'd love to play on PC. I'm even used to it on the beta, but we'll see. By the way, my full specs on my PC are in the About section of my channel if you're curious on seeing the rest of the build. I have not upgraded anything in recent years, and I haven't even overclocked yet because I haven't felt the need to yet. Lastly, last point of news, DICE released an article discussing changes they're going to be making to the base game based on beta feedback and what they've seen in the beta thus far. The first change of note will be Conquest Mode scheme will be slightly different than what they've seen in the beta. Of course, we've seen, and I have a video discussing it too, on how much Conquest Mode actually did change, but from what I've seen, as DICE says, what they're going to be doing for Conquest is leaving it basically the same way it was in the beta. There won't be that ticket bleed, and it won't be counting down as opposed to up like it is now. But it says, and I quote, "The next time you play the game, capturing objectives and getting kills will both contribute toward the final score of a Conquest match. Of note, they are not changing the system back to the original style. They are simply adding kills as part of reducing the kill count, or the ticket count. For further clarifications, I think what they meant too was that deaths and not kills, so it's sort of a verbiage error possibly, may help to add more viability to the medic class, as revives will be significant in bringing back tickets and a large factor as to how people may actually play as the medic class more. So not necessarily deaths or kills, but deaths, because deaths can be revived, tickets can be brought back. I think that will be how it plays out." DICE goes on to state that they've been monitoring rush mode and how they'll be making tweaks to the game mode. This is purely speculation from me, but I believe this will be maybe adding more players to the player count from 24 to 32 total players, and perhaps removing armor from maps, some armor or all armor from some rush maps if they're keeping the player count low. Perhaps they're adding customizable server options to up the player count as well. That remains to be seen. Next, DICE said that they will be altering balance concerns in the form of weapons and vehicles. In terms of weapons, this will probably be taking the spread from weapons down or reducing velocities, but personally I'd much rather see the weapons stay as is for now and get addressed after the base game and a substantial time where lots of people have gone through the process of playing as the weapon, seeing the concerns, seeing what needs to be fixed or what weapons need to be balanced. But right now I'd hope they leave it as it is. I actually kind of like the learning curve presented on how each class's weapon sort of had a niche. I would prefer that just stay as is for now. Next, in terms of vehicles, specifically, the light tank will be nerfed. How? We don't know yet. I have a full 10-minute length video discussing the very logistics of potential nerfs and changes, so please watch that. Please give me some feedback on that, whether you agree or disagree. I'll leave it in the discussion. But if I had to suspect anything, it would be that third-person viewing and the ability to repair yourself will be the targets of the nerf. I would also like to see how the tank plays out in the base game, where everyone wasn't subjected to the unlock glitch and everyone was screwing around, because my biggest worry that they're going to do is that they're going to over-nerf the tanks, and they're going to need to either buff the tanks back to what they were, or they're going to over-nerf the tank weapons as a result of the tank over-nerf. So it's going to be this massive clusterfuck for months of trying to find the right balance when they probably could have just left it as it was and gone through the trials at the start. We'll see. Maybe a third-person change for the light tank I wouldn't be opposed to. I think it makes the most sense. Maybe the tank not being able to repair itself so quickly. Maybe that's another concern. We'll see. Watch my video. Lastly, for vehicles anyway, horses will have their health reduced, which makes quite a bit more sense. But I hope it's not reduced to the point where their utility of flanking and pushing through a weak enemy front gets reduced too much. Lastly, of course, support will be given a gadget to deal with vehicles, and I suspect from past game supports it's probably going to be Dynamite or the equivalent of what C4 was, which I'd be fine with. If it's some sort of RPG type weapon, sort of like how Assault already has now, I can see tanks becoming reduced to nothing. Because I fully imagine it, with the amount of people that have been complaining about tanks, you're going to see Assault become a much more prominent factor on the base game. You're going to see that the anti-tank weapons become much more prominent, and adding in maybe the fact that tanks are now going to become weaker and that support will now have a weapon to deal with them, this could be a cause for balance concerns with tanks. We'll see. Time will tell. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you're new, please subscribe for more. See you later.